So we also need to talk about the divergence of conflict theory and the emergence of critical theory in the Frankfurt School. And so here we're going to talk briefly about the differences between the Chicago School and the Frankfurt School. And we're going to talk about some of the main points of Horkheimer, Adorno, Marcuse, and Fromm, who were the founders of the Frankfurt School. All right, so let's first talk about the differences between the Chicago School and the Frankfurt School. The main concern of the Chicago School is the pursuit of research and theory development. So we find with the Chicago School that there's quite a hands-off approach to the study of society. The Frankfurt School was nearly the opposite of that. The main concerns of the Frankfurt theorists were action and critique of society, and this is where that critical theory comes into play. The Frankfurt School theorists were more concerned with, rather than just walking out and doing some research and reporting the results, they were more concerned with using their ideas, their philosophical and theoretical notions about society to critique the status quo and to change society for the better. So while the Chicago School's main platform was research to understand society, the main platform for the Frankfurt School was research to change society for the better. And so you can see that that's quite a different orientation. This idea of changing society for the better can be a little bit problematic for some sociologists to agree with, because it can, if we're not careful, encourage us as sociologists to take a political stand and to advocate for that particular point of view. So we've got to be careful when we use the Frankfurt School orientation in our sociology. The Chicago School utilizes mostly macro sociology, where for the first time we start to see the Frankfurt School really bring in a significant emphasis on the use of psychoanalysis and psychology. So it's a much more micro-sociological approach than the Chicago School. And so we see these competing ideas or ideals, realistically, of objectivity and subjectivity in these two schools. Chicago School theorists would assert to us that the Frankfurt School is subjective, in that they tend to use their own personal ideas, beliefs, values, impressions of society to make their theoretical judgments about society, and further that they use that to advocate for change that they see as being beneficial. The Frankfurt School, on the other hand, would say that the Chicago School is too removed. What's the point of having that big sociological brain if you're not actually going to put that information to some good use and encourage or affect social change? And so while the Chicago School would say we're very objective, we use the scientific process in order to study society, the Frankfurt School would say, hey, you can't be purely objective. And the reason for that is because every single person, researcher or not, filters information through their own experiences. And so when you read something and think about something, or when you see something and think about what just happened, you're filtering that experience through what your stores of knowledge are. So for the Frankfurt School, pure objectivity is not possible. So let's take a look at some of the main ideas of some of the more popular Frankfurt School theorists. So Horkheimer is the first we'll talk about, and he uses conflict theory and then what he terms critical theory as a platform to enlighten and emancipate people. So here we see the very core of what Marx would have also asserted was essential to the creation of a more just society. Horkheimer says that we must use our criticisms of society to help people understand what their true place is in the structure, and to help and encourage that emancipation of those people. And so Horkheimer really encourages change with regard to how he views and theorizes about society. This is very unlike that traditional positivistic approach to research that we see with the Chicago School, that we see as a thread with Emil Durkheim, with Talcott Parsons. All of these theorists would have said that we need to remain detached from our subject of inquiry. And so Horkheimer would assert that you can stay detached, but you're still not going to be purely objective. You're still going to filter through your own set of experiences what that information means. So his critique here is reflecting on the limits of how we see claims in society. And claims in a scientific term is things that can be viewed as objective reality. So you can see here the influence of psychoanalysis. You can see here the influence of philosophy. You can see here also a rejection of some of the original concepts of sociological theory and inquiry. Adorno was also prominent in the Frankfurt School and with the emergence of critical theory, and his work, I have to tell you, is very, very complex, and so it's hard to reduce just to a few simple sound bites. But he believed that sociological language was a political construct. Now, what does that mean? Well, really what he said was the language that researchers use, all of these terms and phrases and the jargon that we use to explain society, was politically constructed, and that it helped to maintain the status quo, the structure. And he saw this as a problem. He saw all of these theories that we use as problematic because we took them at value. We said that these theories make sense. So he encouraged all of us to tear down sociological theory, that we should really stringently test it, and when it's not working, we need to discard it. And so he wanted us to understand that many of the aspects of society, even as sociologists, were influenced by the strengthening of the current social order. He saw this as a passive type of existence. He saw this as encouraging alienation. And we get back now to that very important idea of Marx, that when you don't feel connected to the structure of society, alienation will happen. And this, Adorno felt, just as Marx did, was extremely problematic for the contemporary capitalist societies that he was observing. Like Adorno, Herbert Marcuse was also concerned with the dehumanizing effects of contemporary capitalism and new technology. He also felt that capitalism exploited most of us and objectified many of us, and he said that, again, this objectification led to alienation. He said that people, after a while, would begin to feel like just simply cogs in the machine, a piece of the apparatus, and that this dehumanizes them. It takes away from the essence of who they are, and instead people start to see themselves as simply pieces of the puzzle with realistically little to no control over any aspects of their social life. And so he really was influential in the 1960s student movement in the United States, and he encouraged the new left to be extremely intolerant of the right. Now, what does that mean? Did he advocate for revolution? Yes, if you read Marcuse's work, he would have said that in order for us to change these problems that we had with contemporary capitalism, we needed to revolt. And so that student movement in the 1960s was very much influenced by the writings of Marcuse. Fromm was the most psychologically oriented of the Frankfurt School theorists, and he also, like Marcuse, rejected Western capitalism, said it was dehumanizing and contributed to alienation. What he also said was that capitalism encourages self-interest and role internalization. Now, what does that mean? Well, what he said was this alienation causes us as individuals to start seeing ourselves in terms of less human and more role-oriented. For example, you. In this class, you likely see yourself not as a human, not as an individual necessarily, but as a student. You understand the expectations of the role of student. Well, what Fromm would have said is that the more capitalist a capitalist society becomes, the more we internalize those roles and the less humanistic we see ourselves and other members of society. So the common threads here for these theorists and other theorists of the Frankfurt School is the emergence of the criticisms of modern society. These theorists as a group would encourage us to challenge the status quo. They would encourage us to be skeptical of any information, including the works of other sociologists. This group would say that the only way we can understand reality is through our own subjective lens, and that true objectivity is a fantasy. All right, I hope this helps. Take care.